Thank you so much for being here. I come here with deep gratitude and love and commitment and joy. It's kind of amazing that I'm here today. And so many thanks to Claire and the organizers for using their power and their privilege and their place to be able to bring me in. And that's kind of a little bit of the focus of my talk today, is about being marginalized and how we can use our power and strength. It's a practice of the Western Mass RLC to do a land acknowledgement when we are places, and the thought is that to help us realize where we are, it's important to look at how we got here. And so I'm going to read that part. In the spirit of uncovering hidden truths of this land, its people, and their collective histories, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the ancestral ground of indigenous people. And though I intentionally choose not to name specific groups of people, as I have not established personal relationships with the people of this land, and want to not misstep in our attempt to honor them, I do acknowledge that they are not forgotten people, that I see them and hear them and value them. I offer our respects to their elders, past and present, as well as to their emerging leaders, as we learn to negotiate how best to be humble guests in their homelands. In this journey to share truth and seek reconciliation, I also make room for the histories of those who were brought here against their will or drawn here in the hopes of building better lives, and whose stories are interwoven in the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us all here to this place and time. Giving voice to these truths is an essential part of creating mutually respectful relationships and connections across all barriers of heritage, difference, and I invite you to join us in this practice by naming these truths at your events. And so a funny thing happened on the way to the keynote on marginalization. I suffered some marginalization from the APA, and my words did not seem to carry value if they were words from the first-hand perspective. And people worked with me to rewrite my abstract and to put it in the third person. And I'm so grateful for the organizers of this event, because they told me, regardless of the APA and CEUs, that I would be able to speak, but that they thought it was very important to try to get accreditation for this talk. So they were supportive in every way, and that included resource-wise, giving me the resources to be able to get my body here and to be here, and that's greatly appreciated as well. And so now I'm here, and I can speak in my own words, in my own way, and I hope you can open your hearts to my words, because it is one thing to be invited to the table, and it is another to have my words valued. And so I'm asking you to sit with your discomfort. I have discomfort being here. I have discomfort being at this conference, and I ask you to sit with your discomfort during my talk and consider the requests I make of you at the end of it. My credentials are my tragedies transformed, and my experience of making space for others to find their way. And I was born in the margins. And I was a kid who was born to young parents who did not have health insurance. My uncle, who really wasn't related to me, but he was another Arab in the neighborhood, and therefore he was family, he delivered me and handed me to my dad. I came out with a bilateral cleft palate and cleft lip, and he handed me off to my dad and said, "Get this baby to a hospital." And they did not let my mother see me because I looked so different, and they were concerned for how upset she would be. My heritage is that my great-grandfather came to this country, and he was friends with Kahil Gibran, if anybody know his book, The Prophet. And Kahil said to my great-grandfather, he said, nobody will be able to pronounce your name. And you are the first of your family to make this journey. So you are the Hadge. And so sometimes people say a Hadji. And so that is how I got my last name. And I walk around with white privilege most of the time, but that is not my heritage and that is not my identity. And sometimes it creates inner conflict to have something mirrored back to me, but to yet to not feel that I belong. So when I was a little kid, we lived in a house, and it was a house that my mother did not have to pay rent to live at. And there were people upstairs who gave me attention and affection, and I felt seen. But there came a time when I was upstairs when my words, "No, stop, that hurts," did not work. And I went downstairs and I told my mother, "Can you tell them not to do that? Because it hurts." And my mother became angry. And she told me, "You can't go upstairs anymore." And there came a night when I wanted to, my little heart just wanted to be held. I just wanted some care, some attention. And I thought, maybe I'll take that risk to go upstairs. Maybe I'll find kindness and care there. And that is when I had my first vision. And what it represented to me was death. I had gone up to the first landing, and I could look up, and this is what I saw. And I didn't know if death was there for me. And I took one step up, and it swished closer, and I realized it was there in relationship to me. And it spoke to me in a way with a power that my mother's words did not have. And I knew not to go up those stairs that night. The second vision I had was of an angel. And when she walked close to me, her light touched me. And in that moment, I felt love and connectedness. And I did not feel small. I felt part of something huge and beautiful. And I thought to myself, maybe I could find a loving mother who would protect me from evil. And this is me at 12. And you can look at these drawings, and maybe they look like the progression of a disease to you. Or maybe they look like a voice that gets loud and overwhelming. And maybe they look like trauma becoming overwhelming. But however those drawings speak to you, I ask you not to forget the person. And I had wished and hoped that somebody could just look into my eyes and know what was going on in my house with my family. I dare not speak, but maybe somebody could just see the suffering I was going through. And at 12, I had a voice, and it was telling me, I hope someone took a picture because I cannot keep the jacket. So I had a voice telling me to kill myself or kill my mother, that we could not both live in that house. And the truth was that living in that house was killing the both of us, but in different ways. And I went to the one person who had, on occasion, intervened on my behalf. And I told him, I cannot stand living here anymore. And his response was cruel. And he told me I should be grateful for what I had. And I told him I'd rather die. And his response was to demonstrate that he could choke the life out of me. And as he was choking me, he whispered in my ear, "It takes a long time to die. It's very painful, and you need to fight it every step of the way." And when I regained consciousness on the floor, I took in a breath of air, and it hurt. It was hot in my lungs. And the lesson for me was that to live is to feel pain. And I chose to blame myself. I thought, if I could just do the right thing, everything would be okay. And that was a more acceptable thought than to think that the people who were there in charge of my care would continue to do cruel things to me. And I blamed myself. And I thought, I blamed that little girl. And in my effort to salvage some part of myself, I broke into pieces. And I wanted that little girl to die because I blamed her for all that had happened to her. And I drank and drugged to keep the memories and feelings down. And it worked until it didn't work. And so in my words, when resources are lacking and basic needs go unmet, rights are ignored, relationships betrayed, and valued roles hover out of reach. How does one adapt? For many of us, we reach points in our lives where we can no longer bear what we have experienced. And in our struggle to make sense of the senseless, we become lost. And what happens when what we are told is real does not match what our heart and our mind and our body say to be true? And the only certainty is that impending doom will be our constant companion in a hostile world. And our efforts to find a path upon which some piece of us can survive, our identities may be shattered and contorted and then stolen by diagnosis. And so when I entered the mental health system, this thing happened, that the messages from my childhood were repeated. Don't tell, or someone will get hurt. If you talk about it, you can lose your rights. And I was told they won't believe you anyways as a child. And in mental health services, I was told your experiences are not real. And they will say that you're crazy. And in the mental health system, I was told I was mentally ill. As a child, I was told, quit fighting and make it easier for yourself. In the mental health system, I was told, be compliant or it'll get worse. As a child, I was told, I'm doing this for your own good. In the mental health system, I was told, we're doing this for your own good. As a child, I was told, you should be grateful for how good you have it. In the mental health system, I was told to accept and be happy with a very limited life. And so sometimes people talk about getting insult upon injury, but I would say this was injury upon injury. You know, the response to my trauma was to traumatize me even more. And so the result was that these services reinforced feelings of powerlessness, of shame and guilt, and silencing, and impending doom, hopelessness, and this last one, and sometimes forcing capitulation to authority. And what I mean by that was that as a child, sometimes I had to make decisions. And sometimes those decisions were, you know, if I was a participant in what I thought was evil, that I might come out of it less scarred. You know, if I could convince one of my siblings to get in the bed instead of me, you know, and that's very shame and guilt producing, and it is a way of trying to make it through something. And here I am being told, you know, you can voluntarily commit yourself, or we can commit you. And once again, I was being asked to do something that I thought was wrong, but did it because it was a less painful way to go. So I'm hoping people can see how those things get mirrored. And so what happens when you get a mental health diagnosis? Guess what? You may have been marginalized before. You're going to be marginalized more. And what happens to my, my identity shifts to being a mental patient. That is my role, and my responsibility is to be compliant. And my resources diminish because now perhaps I've alienated myself from my family and whatever resources I had. And in terms of relationships, once someone gets a mental health diagnosis, or at least the ones that I got, it affected every relationship and in every way in which people saw me. So if I showed up in an emergency room in a great deal of pain, and they saw my mental health record, I just didn't have credibility. And fortunately for me, my eldest daughter is a nurse, and on this particular situation, she came in and explained to them, in relationship to the psychiatric drugs I was on, I had become dehydrated, and my heart rhythm was getting thrown off, and she could advocate for me to get the actual care I needed. And I don't know, what would have happened if I didn't have her come in and do that. And there are many, many stories like that of people actually having broken bones and not having anybody even take an x-ray to figure that out, just to be dismissed based on a diagnosis. And so by getting a diagnosis, my social capital was reduced. My ability to be a parent and my grandparent rights and my ability to fly across this country, I cannot get pre-check clearance because I have been committed. It's just kind of amazing. You know, my boss jokes, you know, it was easier to clear your criminal record than your mental health record. We once did a training recently with somebody from social services, and I said to them, is there any way that I can clear my record with social services? I'm like, none of my children were ever removed, and, you know, but it interferes. And she said, no, once you're on that list, you're always on that list. You know, and that's it. And here I am giving her a training, you know, and so no matter what, that is the way it's viewed. And how does social capital impact who gets diagnosed and what they get diagnosed with and how they get treated? And I would suggest looking at Mad in America because they have like a lot of great articles talking about, you know, how race in particular, class and gender impact who gets treated what way. I was at an alternatives conference and Patrick Kennedy was speaking. And he was promoting forced treatment. And his justification for that was that his family has permission to commit him if he picks up a drink or a drug. And my response was, that is a great decision for you if you want to make it, but please don't make it for me. And oh, by the way, the place I get sent won't be the place you get sent. And so I read this book. It's about queer identities, but I think the things in it can apply to the entire mental health system. The DSM can be used to blame transgender victims of discrimination for their own experience. But I think we could reread it as saying the DSM can be used to blame victims of discrimination for their own oppression. And so I hope that can sink in for people. And so the question is, how do we reclaim our place in this world and our own very own sense of self? How do we create spaces where people can make meaning and build the life they want to live? And so this transformation can happen in relationships. At one point I was facing the last time I was facing forced commitment. I had to run off in the woods because I didn't want to be committed. And I had this strategy of a kayak. And if I'm in a kayak, I'm in the middle of the lake, no matter what I see or hear, I know I'm in a kayak in the middle of the lake. And it made it easier just to watch what was happening or to observe it than to feel like it was actually happening. But on the third day, it started to rain. And I had this occasion of going to a place where I could get Wi-Fi. And I would text or email Sarah Davidow, the director of the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community. And she said to me, are you ready to come back? And I said, I'm trying to figure this out on my own. And she said, you know, maybe if you could figure it out on your own, you would have already. And she said, we have a place for you to come back. You can come to our peer-run respite. And I said, you know, I feel really weird because I helped to hire the people there. And she said, why did we create the respite? And then, you know, I had my little epiphany of the obvious, which was, oh yeah, we created it so people in the community, when they needed support, could find an alternative. And so I went there, and people said to me, you know, what if anything is helpful about being in the hospital? And I had an answer, and I didn't like it, but my answer was, sometimes there was something valuable about being locked in a room for 3 days. And then what they said to me is, we have rooms here, and we have locks, but they lock from the inside. And what I found out was I could go through an extreme experience without being extremely drugged. And it was pretty amazing for me. And so when we think about citizenships and how to be not a second class, but a full class citizen, we can't ignore the obvious. Basic human needs. In the 70s, I learned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What happened to that? Because it doesn't seem like the system has adopted that. Affordable housing, economic paths forward. If I have a Social Security check of $760, I don't care how penny-wise you teach me to be. I am still at 50% below the poverty rate. It doesn't change. But I can tell you, I once was in a program called Common Sense, where they did teach you about credit cards and mortgages and life insurance and all this and that. But the more important thing they did was they created savings accounts. And for every dollar you put in, they put in two. And that money didn't go against your benefits, and you could use that money for education or training or small business. And that money enabled me to help my youngest child, who is struggling in high school, to leave high school and to finish high school by going to community college. And I could get him a laptop and pay for classes. So there are programs out there, or have been, that actually help people build equity. With the Western Mass RLC, we have career initiative grants. And again, this is money that's not held against somebody's benefits. And people can write a proposal. And maybe that proposal is, I want to create my own rap CD. Or maybe the proposal is, I want video equipment so I can video all the shows, all the local music shows. Or maybe, I want that money so I can create a dog training class. Or publish a book of poetry. And so there's all these different ways where you can actually spend money, not so much on policing the poor, that's where most of the money goes, policing the poor, but to actually give people opportunity. And this last point is what kills me, to have people discharged into homelessness. And when people would ask me, are you safe? They acted like it was all something within me, but they weren't asking where I lived. They didn't get to know that I got to see someone shot to death on my front step in broad daylight on Father's Day while babysitting a grandchild. And the ridiculous thing of that was a bullet went through the window, and the housing authority tried to charge us for the window. So they weren't asking those kind of questions. And I have a friend who's struggling, and they are so much more willing to spend money, thousands of dollars, to incarcerate him for stealing soap so he could take a shower, or putting him in a locked psychiatric unit, than they are to help him get affordable housing. And so this is another obvious one. I have such a hard time sharing this slide without laughing or something. I'm not sure what the right emotion is, but thank goodness there's research, I guess sarcasm. Thank goodness there's research that proves that if your parents love and accept you and your identity, you might be less depressed. and so for me, as my identity has changed, it has been, it's made me question so many times, was I made for this world? Is there a place for me in this world? Can people respect who I am? Is there a bathroom I can use without somebody getting upset? And last week, when coming back from Texas, I had a new experience, and for the first time, I got an enhanced pat down from a woman, and because I'd have always gotten them from men, and it was like okay in the moment, and then it wasn't okay, and I had this moment of panic. Oh, people are seeing me as a woman now. I'm not safe. And I had to come back and remember, no, I have so much more, so much more love in my heart that I can negotiate these things. I don't have to feel like that 6-year-old girl. I can love her and embrace her, but I don't have to behave in that way. I don't have to claim that identity. And so what changed for me a lot was hearing voices groups. And instead of mirroring back disease at me, or that I'm broken or wrong, I could go in there and dump, I'm so screwed up, blah, 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 blah. And people would say, you must have something going for you, because you're still on the planet. And mind you, I walked into those groups, and I was on Thorazine at the time. And so I was not a great speaker, and I mostly observed. And what I learned that so many of the things that I was going through were really just normal human reactions. And that was really cool. They also taught me about the harm reduction guide to coming off psych drugs. Because all my conversations with providers was, take it, no, I don't want to, well, we need to give you more. And this whole idea that there could be withdrawals from medication versus symptoms reappearing was really new for me. And the idea that there was something in between Thorazine and nothing, which, maybe it doesn't sound that amazing, but, I have not had those kind of conversations with a provider. An amazing thing happened, too, where I could begin to say the things that I was literally beaten and told that I couldn't say. And my body would feel the impending doom. Like I could know I'm here, and it's 2000 and whatever, but my body would have that fear. And I could say a little thing and put it out there and come back a week later and see that no one got hurt. And I didn't get locked up. People could ask me questions. Oh, so you have a voice telling you to kill yourself. When does it come? Does it come in relationship to something? That feeling it creates in you, have you felt that feeling before? The words that it says were those words that you heard before. And this last thing, this idea of having new kinds of relationships, because at this point, I was reduced to only having people who are in paid roles talking to me. But now I was making friends, and I had to relearn. I had to relearn to say hello and goodbye. Like I had just lost that in services, and even when I said nothing, people thanked me for being there, which really confused me. And then someone explained to me, "You're bearing witness to other people's stories, and that's of value." And so this whole idea of moving away from diagnostic labels and moving towards understanding the individual story and the cultural context is one of the key paradigm shifts. And moving away from focusing on chemical imbalances to addressing power imbalances. And that, to me, has been the healing path. And when I went to the Western Mass Recovery and Learning Community that hosted the HMN groups, people would present me with opportunities and say, oh, I saw this, I thought of you, and would you like to da-da-da? And I would always say no. And finally, Sarah said to me, why do you always say no? And I said, what if I don't like it? And she goes, that's fine if you don't like it. But I had been so used to Department of Mental Health Services that if you said you liked something, it went into your service plan. And now it was a goal. And if you didn't do it, you were in trouble. And I'm like, well, maybe I like yoga 3 times, and maybe I'm done, is that okay? And so to have permission to try things, and maybe not have them work well, but that's okay. And so at the Western Mass Recovery and Learning Community, I built relationships, and this amazing thing happened that even when I would implode or end up back in a locked unit, I didn't lose those relationships. People came and visited me. And I can remember telling my crew, bring me energy drinks and coffee. And one time somebody came in with some, and the nurse said, do you have a caffeine problem? I said, no, I have a Haldol 4 times a day problem. and one of my closest friends said to me, how do you maintain employment? And so when Sarah came back to visit me, and I said to her, I'm curious, how do I maintain employment? And she said, I have a long-term investment in you. I said, wow, I need to get one of those. And she said, you'll just have more stories to tell. And what that kind of approach was an approach that said, I have belief that you can make it through. I have belief that you have something to offer. And that was not the message I was getting in the mental health system. To have people validate, to show curiosity and vulnerability and acceptance, that I could tell the secrets and the dark thoughts and not be rejected or punished. To have helped to sift through those marginalizing messages and decide if I believed in them. Were there parts I wanted to keep and were there parts I wanted to let go? To move forward from what was wrong with me to what was right. And that different does not mean less than. To hear somebody say, that makes sense, considering what you've been through. I got this spiritual advisor, which my higher power has a huge sense of humor because he's a white guy who plays golf and wears a button-down shirt. Like, if I have a prejudice, that would be who it's against. And and what he told me was, you did what you knew how to do. And what you did probably kept you alive. But you don't need to do it now because it's killing you now. And he taught me that I had a loving higher power that knew everything that I had done, forgave everything, and loves me anyways and only wants the best. And his ability to pray over me and for me to feel that presence was incredible. And that was when love broke through. And maybe since Larry Davidson can talk about dinosaurs and love, I can be legitimate and talk about love as well. And when love breaks through the fear and negative messages, we can develop a sense of personal value, dare to trust and find hope. We become able to withstand and bearing the truth of trauma and the injustices of the world. And in those moments, we may find the strength to own our own broken parts and discarded selves. When shame and guilt are left by the way, miracles can happen, people can heal, and new ways of navigating the outer and inner world can develop. To know with my heart and mind and body that even with what happened to me and how I responded and the things I did, I can be loved and love myself. To tell all the secrets, to be fully known and still loved. And miracles was one of the words that had to come out of my abstract. And so what I want to say was miracles, by definition, are when the impossible happens. And so according to the alleged science of the medical model of human distress, according to the diagnosis and prognosis I was given, being here in front of you in this room, not heavily drugged, being in the here and now is impossible. And so I say it is a miracle. And I say that there's evidence of miracles in this room. And please don't lose hope and belief in miracles. And this is my ask. My ask is that you locate yourself. Where is your power? Where is your privilege? You know, whether it's something you've had the internal wherewithal to earn and the external opportunity to earn, wherever it is, locate it. And you could spend time feeling guilty about where you are. And by the way, Shaku Matai, who was here yesterday, he does a workshop on this that's far more developed than what I'm presenting. But locate yourself. And I want to say also, that circle, the mainstream circle, you know, maybe your power isn't there. You know, maybe your power, if you think about the civil rights movement, that was not the mainstream. If you think about the women's liberation movement, that was not the mainstream. Nor was the LGBTQ movement. So your power may not be in that circle. I have incredible power sitting in a jail doing a peer support group. I have incredible power going back to a mental health unit that I used to be locked on. I have social capital in those places. And so locate your power, and decide, what you want to grow and whatnot. And I will tell you, what's been one of the strongest, best tools for me was humility. Meaning, an honest accounting of who and what I am and what I could be. To be open and honest and willing to learn and grow. And when people say Caroline and I do great trainings, that's because we read what people say in response to those trainings. And we continue to learn and grow. We don't pretend to know everything and have all the answers, but we are willing to partner with people so they can find their own answers. And so when you locate yourself, decide what is your approach. I did a grand rounds with an OBGYN doctor regarding trauma and OBGYN practices, and she wanted to title it First Do No Harm. And it kind of reminded me, that is an oath a lot of people take. And maybe you're in a place where you can do no harm. Or maybe you're in a place where you think the good I do outweighs the harm. And maybe you're in a place of opening doors to different possibilities. And I will say the privilege I enjoy the most is having to work for the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, because I don't have to take notes. I don't have to try to fix people. I don't have to assess and diagnose. I get to just be a person with people, and I can bring my whole self to it and create a space where they can bring their whole selves to it. And so I'm asking people to be honest and open and willing to change, to approach people with curiosity and to partner with them. And I want to tell you a partnering story gone wrong. I had a friend who has a huge heart. One time we were walking and somebody was sitting on a grate, and my friend said to me, "Can I give him my jacket?" I said, "That's your decision. My question would be, do you have another one?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And he gave the person his jacket. And then I saw him on another occasion. I was giving him a ride. And he said, "I don't know what it is. People seem to like me, but then when I get close to them, they move away." And I thought in my head that our relationship was strong enough for me to say the truth. And I told him, "You are a wonderful person. You have a huge heart. But I will tell you right now, you have a really strong body odor." And he said, "Thank you for telling me." And I dropped him off, and 4 hours later, he called me up. And he said, "Can you come help me?" And I said, "What is the problem?" He says, "I'm in the Amherst prison. I'm in the Amherst Police Department." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "I went to CVS and stole some soap." And I went there, and they wouldn't let me pay for $10 worth of body supplies. And they said, "We have a zero tolerance policy." And what I had not realized was this person did not have a home or a place to take a shower. So if I had been a better partner with him, I would have asked him. I might have said, "Oh, you haven't showered in a while," and asked him about that. I made assumptions. I made assumptions that he didn't know. He knew. He just didn't have the resources to deal with it. Another partnering story, really short, is I've lived in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which has the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the country. It was a planned community, and when they planned it, they brought in the, quote, illegal Irish to work in the factories. And so we have this huge parade. And in the neighborhood, my daughter owns a house. It's predominantly people of color. And so one time a year, they clean the street and they paint the the 3 pullovers on it. And we like to say, this is when the white people come and pee on your lawn. because this is the day where it's okay to drink like an alcoholic. Like everybody has a pass on St. Patrick's Day, and so I go to the parade, and one of my daughters is in the parade, and her partner is a person of color, clearly a person of color, and he has a Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup. And we are surrounded, and we're on the whiter side of Holyoke. It's actually like, they talk about the flats, and as you go up the hill, the wealth and color change. But anyways, we're on the wrong side, I guess, and there are people drinking everywhere, and a police officer comes up to him and tells him to take the lid off his cup of coffee so they can smell it. And what is my reaction? I want to tell the guy, and my friend looks at me and goes, "Don't say a word, because I'm the one who's going to have to bear the consequences." And so that's more about partnering. You may think you know what's best for somebody, but realize they have to deal with those consequences. So partner with people, look for the context of distress, promote access to resources and participation, amplify voice, just like me being here is pretty amazing. Providing choice. Advocacy, I had spent 20 years going in and out of mental hospitals not knowing there was such a thing as a 3-day notice. I didn't know I could sign a paper and say I want to get out and that there'd have to be a hearing. So information alone is empowering. And the defining principles of the Western Mass RLC talk about self-determination, recognizing personal strength, the potential for change, genuine human relationships, mutuality, and healing environments. And it's such a struggle within the mental health system to actually create healing environments. And so there's this picture of Dr. Robert Gardner. He used to have a practice in Connecticut. He's a psychiatrist, he's a neurologist, and I would throw him out there as a challenge, because he was the last psychiatrist I saw, and I can remember asking him, "What is my diagnosis?" And he said, "You're a human being." And he said to me, I had been off all medication, and when I met him, I couldn't talk, and I gave him this little file card that said, "Help me." And he provided me with choices. And he was willing to write to me, and I could write back, because I was having a hard time listening. So he really worked with me, and he was humble. He said, "I think I can help you, but there may be bumps in the road." And he was trained as a neurologist, and he taught, instead of telling me my brain was broken, he said, "You can make new neural pathways." And he talked about meditation. And we would throw books at each other. "Well, have you read this one, How to Lose Your Mind and Build a New One?" And we would go back and forth. And he was truly a friend. And so a person in that position of power can do good. So I don't want to hear, "I'm in this place and I can't do it." What I want to hear from people is, "I'm in this place, how can I make it change? Or how can I be that different message in that place to somebody?" And thank you so much for having me here.